Have you ever noticed this? The morning after your country wins a really big football match, something feels different. People seem happier, they smile more, even strangers act a little friendlier. It's hard to explain, but it almost feels like the whole country wakes up in a better mood. For a long time, I thought that was just me romanticizing football, but it turns out it isn't. You see, researchers have actually studied this, and what they found surprised me. You see, when a national team wins a major match, the effects can go far beyond the stadium. People report feeling happier. We even have seen stock markets being affected. People can become a little more generous toward each other. However, when the team loses, the opposite can happen. I've spent the last few weeks reading the research, trying to understand what it all means. Because when you really stop and think about it, you can agree that it's a little bit strange. A football match lasts about 90 minutes, 22 players. Most of us have never met them, right? Yet, what they do on that pitch can change the mood of millions of people, even people who never watched the game. So, how is that possible? Welcome back. I'm just Blue Kelly, and this is the part 4 of the hidden science of the World Cup. So far in this series, we've looked at some really interesting questions. One, we have looked at why so many professional footballers are born early in the year. We also looked at why goalkeepers keep diving the wrong way. We also looked at what roles does luck really play in football. But today, I want to go somewhere slightly different because this isn't really a story about football. It's a story why a single game can make millions of people celebrate together or mourn together. And what that says about human nature. Let's start with the good news. Researchers wanted to know whether a country's performance at the World Cup actually changes how people feel. And they weren't interested in just a few fans, but for the country as a whole. So they measured it, and the answer was yes. People living in countries with successful World Cup teams reported higher levels of life satisfaction, especially during the tournament. That is, they actually felt better about their lives. But it gets even more interesting. Researchers also looked at stock markets from different countries during multiple World Cup, and they found a pattern. After a national team wins, the country's stock market often performs slightly better the next day. But after a loss, especially a knockout loss, it often slips back down. Now, these are not huge swings, but the pattern appears again and again across different tournaments, across different countries. So, what's going on? Well, there's actually a name for it. It's called collective effervescence. It sounds complicated, I know, but the idea is simple. More than 100 years ago, the French sociologist Émile Durkheim noticed something interesting. When large groups of people experience the same emotion at the same time, they begin to feel connected. For a moment, it feels like you're part of something bigger than yourself. And football is one of those ways, one of at least the strongest way we experience that today. And the World Cup is probably the biggest example on earth. Think about it. Billions of people watching the same event, feeling the same tension, celebrating the same goal, or perhaps also suffering the same defeat at almost the exact same moment. That's incredibly rare. And according to the research, that shared emotional experience doesn't end when the referee blows the final whistle. It spills into everyday life, into people's moods, their conversations, their decisions, even the way they treat complete strangers. So maybe football isn't just entertainment. Maybe for a few days, it changes the emotional temperature of an entire nation. Now, there is another side to the story, and it's not as pretty or exciting as the other side. You see, researchers in the UK studied what happened on days when England played major football matches. They weren't necessarily looking at the goals or tactics or the possessions. They were looking at domestic violence. And what they found was domestic abuse increased on match days. You see, the biggest rise came after England lost. But shockingly, in some cases, the numbers also went up after wins. And this is due to the fact that the team played below expectations. So, depending on the study, reported cases increased by somewhere between 26 and 38%. Now, let's be careful about what this does and doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that football causes violence. It doesn't mean every passionate fan becomes dangerous. That's not what the research is saying. What it does suggest is that football can amplify emotions that are already there. For most people, that emotion comes out in harmless ways. Celebrating, shouting at the television, feeling disappointed after a loss. But then we move on with life. However, for people who already have violent tendencies, an emotionally charged match can become another trigger. And that is an important distinction because this story isn't really about football. It's about human behavior. Football simply gives us a chance to observe it. And I think that's what stayed with me the most. A football match can reach far beyond the stadium, far beyond the television screen. Sometimes it brings joy, yes, sometimes kindness, sometimes generosity, and some other times it can reveal something much darker. And it reminds us that sport doesn't just reflect who we are. Sometimes it magnifies who we are. So, why does any of this happen? Why can a game affect people this deeply? Part of the answer comes from psychology. There's a psychologist named Henry Tatchfeld who spent years studying something called social identity. His question was simple. How much of who we are comes from the groups we belong to? And his answer was quite a lot. We like to think of ourselves as completely independent, that our successes are ours alone, that our emotions belong to us, right? But that's not really how people work. We naturally become part of groups, families, friendship circles, religions, political parties, countries, and even football teams. And once we see ourselves as part of a group, something interesting happens. Their victories begin to feel like our victories. Their failures begin to feel like our failures, even when we've never met the people involved. That's why people say things like, we won, not they won. Think about that for a second. Millions of people say we, even though they have never stepped onto the pitch. That isn't irrational, it's human. Our brains naturally tie part of our identity to the groups we care about. So when your country scores in the World Cup final, it doesn't just feel like your team scored. It can feel like you won. And when they lose, well, it can feel strangely personal. Even if you know logically that it's just a football match. That's why saying it's only a game doesn't really explain what people experience. Because psychologically, it isn't just a game, it is identity. And the World Cup turns that feeling all the way up for 1 month. Think about it. For 1 month, billions of people are emotionally invested in the same event. They are hoping, they are worrying, they are celebrating, they are grieving all together. There are a very few moments in modern life that can create that kind of shared emotion, honestly. I think that's one of the most extraordinary things about football. It isn't just the tactics, the trophies, or even the goals, but the very fact that one sport can make so many people who have never met, who speak different languages and live thousands of miles apart, feel something together at exactly the same time. And when you stop and think about it, that's pretty amazing. So what do we do with all of this? I think it changes the way we look at football. Perhaps it's to remind us that the most powerful thing about football isn't what happens on the pitch, it's what happens inside us. Because in the end, football has never just been about football. It's always been about people, about identity, about belonging, and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. And maybe that's why millions of us care so much. Not because 22 people are chasing a ball, but because for 90 minutes, their story becomes ours. So the next time your country wins a big match, pay attention the next morning. Look at the people around you. Listen to the conversations. Notice the smiles, the energy. And you might discover that an entire nation really can wake up in a different mood. I'm Judge Blue Kelly. Next week, in part 5 of the hidden science of the World Cup, we'll look at one of football's biggest mysteries. Why do teams built around one superstar so often lose to teams that don't have one at all? So until then, take care of yourself. Remember, God loves you. Bye-bye.